Pre-order my book, American Evil, in the description below. I noticed Kiwi Farms came out and made a statement. They made demands of site admin null in regards to Ricada Law. It is time, considering everything that's been going on, the scope of the situation, the speed of Ricada's degeneracy, the depths of his his corrupt nature, right? It was time to make a Nick Rekieta board. And as always, Null look responded to these people with scorn, with contempt. Like, oh, I can't make a threat a board on Rekieta. He's too boring. He just sits there and drunk and streams all the time. Never mind that the Rekieta thread is now like the most active thread on Kiwi Farms. It is the exact opposite of the Harmon Smith thread. Okay, never mind that everyone on the Grift Wars board is affiliated with Nick Rekieta in some way, shape, or form. Never mind that Rekieta is very potentially going to get into some serious legal trouble, like not just with Monograph, but with the government and possibly with YouTube or Rumble or some other personality. Like, never mind that like his family is headed towards ruin. Never mind that all of it was completely preventable. Oh, Nick isn't a locale big enough for his own board because I say so, says Null. The same person who denied that anything was wrong with Rekieta uh, last year, right? Remember how long it took Null to admit that like anything was wrong with Rekieta? Like, remember how desperately he tried to pretend that people were exaggerating when it came to like what Rekieta was doing and the implications of his behavior and how quickly he was headed to like destroying his own life, like his own career, like everything, right? Like, do you realize just how much Null tried to protect Nick? This is the same exact situation. I think is that like Rekieta deserved his own board a long time ago. If someone as irrelevant as Ethan Ralph got his own board, right? If DSP got his own board, like why isn't Rekieta? Like, honestly, and I'm being completely serious here, you can probably just take the Griff Wars board and just consider it the Nick Rekieta board. Like, the Griff Wars board is already a Nick Rekieta subforum because because everyone on there has some association with Nick, right? Like, Nick is the ultimate example of everything wrong with the people in that board, right? Like, there's a reason Nick has been so dominant in uh, in that subforum, right? He's always at the top. He's always relevant, right? There's always new things going on with him every single day. It feels like. I would argue it's impossible to keep up with it all, right? And here you have Null sitting here and trying to tell you that like, oh, there's nothing wrong with Rekieta. Oh, like he's not big enough. Like, come on. Like, that is just straight up delusional. And this is why. This is why, by the way, like, we have to start condemning Null and his attempts at like manipulating the way that certain people are viewed by the public. Right? Like, this is something I've always been saying about the site, and one of the reasons I have like a big contempt for it is that like a lot of people on the Grift War subforum aren't cows. I've seen like, threads on people like Donald Trump and Razor Fist and Spoonie, who is completely inactive, right? Like, there are lots of people on there that like I'm just kind of like, how are these people considered locales in any way, shape, or form? Right? Spoonie's entire gimmick is that like, oh, he hasn't done anything. So by definition, doesn't that mean that like his thread should be shut down and like people shouldn't be allowed to comment on it anymore? Like, all anybody's been doing on it for the past several years is complaining about how he hasn't done anything. Like, it was a big news when like he lost his house, right? And again, like it's like, okay, like, I agree, Spooning is a terrible person, right? I hate Spoonie more than anybody. I am the biggest Spoonie hater on the planet. But like, if he's not openly making new content, if he's not like doing daily ridiculous things like Ricada is, like why exactly is he as talked about as he is, right? Like why exactly does he have a locale threat? Right? Like Null is seriously trying to paint this image that Ricada isn't as bad as some other people, but I really don't think that's true. I think comparing everybody I'm aware of, the completionist, Pro Jared, uh, like I've seen a lot of other people on there, right? That I've had an experience with that I don't like. Like I genuinely think that Ricada Law is worse than all of them. Like the reason I think people got so fired up about DSP, like wrecking Ricada, was because Ricada, much like Review Tech USA, is objectively worse than Phil, right? You can sit there and do cry all you want about how Ricada hasn't done anything wrong or that like he just sits there and drinks, but like all Phil does is just sit there and play video games. Now you can argue that like, oh, he treats his fans like garbage, he's a beggar, he doesn't work, right? He's bad at the game he plays. And like, yeah, I would agree with you, but when you compare that to like what Review Tech USA does and what Nick does, like it comes up to like a much lesser crime. Like it's not as big of a deal. Like Phil is not as terrible of a person as Kiwifarms makes him out to be, right? And that's kind of my point right now is that like people like Phil are like hated by the community, like far beyond the extent they should be, while people like Ricada, people like Spoonie, like they tend to have like for a long time they were treated with kid gloves, right? I remember what it was like, talking about Ricada like in the really early days of like the decline. Actually, he was always like this, but like when people started noticing that there was something up with him, like how his work schedule didn't make any sense, and how his terrible legal takes and how he handled the Vic thing. Like, people were noticing this like as early as like 2019. I was right there, and we were shouted down by the community at large. Not just Kiwifarms, but like everyone in the Nick sphere. Like, oh, what are you talking about? Nick is great. LawTube is great. We're doing great things here, and it really isn't true. Like, I think Ricada, like more than any other locale I'm aware of, has caused a lot of problems for a lot of people, right? And I think that alone deserves an entire new subforum. I think that like there's been too much overlap with other personalities, right? People like Steel Toe Morning Shows, people like DSP, people like Ethan Ralph, right? Like Ricada's too big of a personality not to have this on board. And the fact that Null is doing everything in his power to try and stop that from happening is ridiculous, I think. This is nothing more than another example of Null trying to exert his influence to try to stop like the natural progression of things. Like I think if it was anyone else going through this process, Null would have created an entire board for him a long time ago.